Hello, welcome to the Historian channel. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Cleopatra VII, known in history simply as Cleopatra, was born in Alexandria, Egypt, in 1969 BC. She was a member of the Macedonian Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt, founded by Ptolemy I after the death of his mentor, Alexander the Great, in 323 BC. Before his death, Alexander had not named an heir, leading to the division of his vast empire among his key generals, including Ptolemy. Since then, the Ptolemaic dynasty had ruled Egypt, maintaining ties with Hellenistic culture while also embracing Egyptian traditions. This cultural blend was evident in monuments such as temples dedicated to the Egyptian goddess Isis at Philae on the Nile River, as well as in the construction of the Great Library and the renowned Lighthouse of Alexandria. These projects helped transform the city into one of the most important cultural and commercial centers of the ancient world. The name Cleopatra, which also belonged to Alexander's youngest sister, was common among the women of the dynasty, just as Ptolemy was for the men. Furthermore, it was customary for siblings in the dynasty to marry each other, a practice aimed at preserving the purity of the royal bloodline. Cleopatra was raised in the luxurious royal palace of Alexandria. By the time she reached adulthood, she was well educated in the major languages of the ancient Mediterranean, such as Greek, Egyptian, and Latin, showcasing intelligence and political acumen that would define her later life. She was likely the daughter of Ptolemy XII, who ascended the throne in 1980 BC after the assassination of his predecessor, Ptolemy XI. The latter was lynched by a mob after murdering his wife, Berenice III, the last surviving daughter of Ptolemy IX. With the throne contested, Ptolemy XII, known as Auletes, became king while his brother assumed the throne of Cyprus. However, the previous king, Ptolemy XI, had bequeathed Egypt to the Roman Republic in his will. To secure his position, Ptolemy XII sought Roman support, paying substantial bribes to Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, amounting to 6,000 talents each. This temporarily secured his reign but made him reliant on Rome. The stability was short-lived. In 1958 BC, Rome invaded Cyprus, leading Ptolemy XII's brother to commit suicide. The king's failure to defend his brother provoked riots in Egypt. As a result, he was deposed and fled to Rome, being replaced on the throne by his wife and sister, Cleopatra VII, and his daughter, Berenice IV. Upon arriving in Rome, Ptolemy XII likely brought the young Cleopatra with him while seeking support to reclaim his throne, though his initial attempts were unsuccessful. Ptolemy XII attempted to bribe the Roman Senate to support his return to Egypt. However, he ultimately secured assistance through further bribes, enlisting an army under the proconsul of Syria, Aulus Gabinius, to invade Egypt. In 55 BC, the kingdom fell, and Ptolemy XII reclaimed the throne after executing his daughter, Berenice. Yet, these bribes left Egypt in severe financial distress and solidified its status as a client kingdom of the Roman Republic. Cleopatra reportedly accompanied her father and the Roman army back into Egypt. Alongside them was a young Marcus Antonius, or Mark Antony, who served as a cavalry general. Antony later claimed to have fallen in love with Cleopatra during the campaign to retake Egypt. In 1951 BC, Ptolemy XII died, leaving the throne to both Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. The siblings were named co-rulers, a clear indication that they were expected to marry, following the Ptolemaic tradition of sibling unions. From the very beginning of her reign, Cleopatra demonstrated an independent spirit. She seemed unwilling to submit to her brother and potential husband, ruling Egypt largely on her own terms. Whether Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII ever officially married remains unclear, but their distinct and separate approaches to governance suggest they operated independently from the outset. Nonetheless, given the dynasty's tradition of sibling marriage, it is equally plausible that they did marry. As queen, Cleopatra worked quickly to secure her position by earning the loyalty of her subjects. Early in her reign, she traveled up the Nile to participate in a ceremony honoring the sacred bull, Buchis. This bull was revered as an incarnation of Mondu, the falcon-headed war god. By respecting Egypt's religious traditions, Cleopatra demonstrated her commitment to the kingdom's heritage. At the same time, she addressed practical challenges, including a critical grain shortage. During the 1st century BC, as throughout its history, Egypt's food supply depended almost entirely on the annual flooding of the Nile River, which occurred around August. These floods were driven by monsoon rains in the Ethiopian highlands, which sent water downstream to inundate the Nile Valley, enabling large-scale cultivation. However, during Cleopatra's early reign, the flood levels were unusually low, threatening agricultural production. She faced this crisis with determination, implementing measures to address the pressing food shortage and stabilize the kingdom. Cleopatra addressed Egypt's grain shortage by restricting its movement and stockpiling supplies in major cities like Alexandria to ensure the poor had access to food. Her efforts to secure the welfare of her people, combined with her participation in religious ceremonies, demonstrate her intelligence and political acumen. By winning the hearts and minds of the Egyptian populace, Cleopatra likely aimed to solidify her power base while simultaneously weakening support for her brother. Interestingly, Rome, Egypt's overlord, was not informed of Ptolemy XII's death until nearly 4 months after it occurred. This delay may suggest Cleopatra deliberately withheld the news to avoid Roman interference for as long as possible. Meanwhile, tensions between Cleopatra and her brother, Ptolemy XIII, grew as she increasingly asserted her influence over the kingdom. By this time, it was evident that she had rejected her brother as a potential husband and saw him as a rival. This rivalry eventually escalated into open conflict. While this internal struggle unfolded in Egypt, events in Rome were poised to alter the course of Cleopatra's life and European history. Gaius Julius Caesar, after being elected consul of the Roman Republic in 1959 BC, accrued significant personal debts. To alleviate this, he sought a governorship or proconsulship, securing the position with the help of influential allies in the Roman Senate, such as Marcus Licinius Crassus and Pompey the Great, who was married to Caesar's daughter, Julia. These 3 powerful and wealthy men, aiming to prevent instability and conflict, formed a political alliance known as the First Triumvirate. Following his appointment as governor of northern Italy, Eastern Europe, and southern Gaul, Caesar launched a series of brilliant military campaigns in Gaul beginning in 1958 BC. These campaigns culminated 6 years later in his decisive victory over the Gauls under their leader, Vercingetorix. Caesar's victories and growing popularity among the Roman populace sparked suspicion and resentment among the Senate and Pompey. Tensions escalated further in 1954 BC when Julia, Pompey's wife and Caesar's daughter, died in childbirth, severing the familial bond between the 2 men. Then, in 1953 BC, Crassus was killed while leading a campaign in Parthia. With Crassus gone, Pompey and Caesar became the 2 most powerful figures in the Roman Republic. The Senate, aligning with Pompey, demanded that Caesar disband his 4 legions in the north and return to Rome as a private citizen. Fearing what his enemies in the Senate might do, Caesar refused. In 1949 BC, he made a fateful decision. He crossed the Rubicon River in northern Italy with his army and marched toward Rome. This act of defiance, bringing an army into Italy, was considered treason. The Senate and Pompey, unable to confront him, fled the capital, leaving Caesar to claim control of Rome. With Caesar and his army in hot pursuit, the senators, along with Pompey the Great, retreated to Greece to regroup and reclaim power. Caesar, however, crossed the Adriatic Sea with his forces and decisively defeated Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus on 9 August 1948 BC. Meanwhile, tensions in Egypt had reached a breaking point. Ptolemy XIII, along with his regent and advisor, Pothinus, seized control of Alexandria, forcing Cleopatra to flee to Syria. There, she quickly assembled an army and prepared to return to Egypt to reclaim her throne. By this time, Pompey, having survived the Battle of Pharsalus, fled from Greece across the Mediterranean, stopping in Cyprus before arriving off the coast of Egypt. He sent emissaries to Ptolemy XIII, requesting refuge. The young king's advisors, including Pothinus, deliberated over their response. They knew Caesar would inevitably pursue Pompey and feared that granting him refuge or allowing him to escape might provoke Caesar's wrath. Ultimately, they decided to betray Pompey. On 28 September 1948 BC, as Pompey approached the shore, he was stabbed to death by assassins. When Caesar arrived in Egypt a few days later, he was presented with Pompey's severed head. To the surprise of Ptolemy XIII and his advisors, Caesar reacted with disgust, demonstrating respect for his former rival despite their enmity. This moment marked a significant shift in the balance of power between Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra, as Caesar's disdain for the murder reflected poorly on the young king. Caesar ordered Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra to disband their armies and negotiate a peace agreement. He also demanded that Egypt repay part of its debt to Rome, a request that Ptolemy XIII refused, further damaging his standing with Caesar. Recognizing the need for a reliable ally in Egypt, one who could fulfill Rome's financial demands, Caesar sought to mediate between the siblings. To appease the Egyptian populace and consolidate his influence, Caesar proclaimed that Ptolemy XIII's younger siblings, Ptolemy XIV and Arsinoe IV, would be installed as rulers of Cyprus, a territory Rome had annexed a decade earlier. Cleopatra was then summoned to negotiate a settlement with her brother. However, Cleopatra sought to meet Caesar privately. Aware of rumors about his infamous libido, she devised a plan to appeal to him directly, aiming to gain an advantage over Ptolemy XIII. Leaving her army in the desert, Cleopatra was smuggled into Alexandria by boat in a bed sack carried by one of her servants. Remarkably, her servant managed to navigate through the streets of the city, past Caesar's guards, and into the royal palace, ultimately delivering Cleopatra to Caesar's private chambers. This first meeting between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar has since attained a near-mythical, even romantic, status in history. However, its true nature remains shrouded in speculation. When considering the success of Cleopatra's first meeting with Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, it is clear this was the most pivotal moment of her life thus far. The pressure she must have felt is unimaginable. Failure to impress the Roman leader would almost certainly have meant death. Contrary to the sexualized and seductive image of Cleopatra that persists today, there is little contemporary evidence regarding her physical appearance. The Roman historian Cassius Dio described her as brilliant to look at, while the Greek historian Plutarch, writing a century earlier, noted, her beauty was not in itself altogether incomparable, nor such as to strike those who saw her. Whatever the truth of her appearance, Cleopatra's courage, intelligence, and evident charm suggest it was her wit, not her physical beauty, that captivated the most powerful men of her era. Shortly after their meeting, Cleopatra and Julius Caesar became lovers. When Ptolemy XIII learned that his sister was consorting with Caesar in Alexandria, he publicly announced her presence in the city, inciting riots. This infuriated Caesar, who responded by forcibly summoning Ptolemy XIII before the city's assembly, along with Cleopatra. Caesar presented the gathered crowd with a copy of Ptolemy XII's will, which clearly stated that Egypt was to be ruled jointly by both siblings. With Ptolemy XIII effectively held as Caesar's prisoner, his regent, Pothinus, the true power behind the young king, plotted to defeat Cleopatra and Caesar. Pothinus ordered Ptolemy XIII's 20,000-strong army to besiege the royal palace where the king was being held. During the siege, a fire broke out in Alexandria's harbor, possibly on Caesar's orders. The blaze spread rapidly, destroying much of the great library of Alexandria and irreparably erasing centuries of accumulated knowledge. Amid the chaos, Cleopatra's younger sister, Arsinoe IV, escaped the city and joined the besieging forces. she assumed command of the army and declared herself Queen of Egypt. Caesar, now desperate as his water supplies dwindled, attempted to seize control of Alexandria's harbor by capturing the island of Pharos, home to the famous Great Lighthouse. However, his forces were repelled, and Caesar was forced to swim to safety, narrowly escaping capture by reaching a Roman ship. By this point, discontent had grown among the commanders of Arsinoe's forces, leading them to begin negotiations with Caesar. Ptolemy XIII and Arsinoe were briefly exchanged during these talks, but once released, Ptolemy XIII resumed command of the Egyptian army and continued the siege. However, unbeknownst to his opponents, Caesar had already sent for reinforcements when the siege began. In early 1947 BC, a Roman army arrived in the Nile Delta to reinforce Caesar. Leaving the besieged palace, Caesar took command of his troops, and they confronted Ptolemy XIII's forces in the Battle of the Nile. The Egyptian army was decisively defeated, and during the rout, the young king drowned when his boat capsized. Following the victory, Caesar proclaimed Cleopatra as queen, sharing the throne with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. In the months that followed, Caesar and Cleopatra enjoyed a luxurious cruise along the Nile on her pleasure barge. During this time, Cleopatra was visibly pregnant with Caesar's child. In the spring of 47 BC, Caesar departed Egypt for Rome to address reports of unrest in the Republic's eastern territories, particularly in the Kingdom of Pontus. It is also likely that Caesar sought to distance himself from Cleopatra for political reasons, as her impending childbirth could be leveraged against him by his enemies in the Senate. After Caesar's departure, Cleopatra gave birth to a son in June of 1947 BC, naming him Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. She publicly declared Caesar as the child's father. However, in Rome, Caesar reportedly denied paternity, likely to avoid political scandal. In 1946 BC, Cleopatra and her husband, Ptolemy XIV, traveled to Rome, where they were granted the title Friends of the Republic. This designation reaffirmed Egypt's status as a client kingdom of Rome and solidified Cleopatra's position as queen. During their stay, Cleopatra was hosted at Caesar's villa outside the city, where she entertained prominent Roman figures, including the senator Cicero, who later described her as arrogant. It is unclear whether Cleopatra remained in Rome continuously during the next 2 years, as Caesar campaigned in Spain against Pompey's remaining supporters. However, by the spring of 44 BC, she was certainly in Rome. Around February of that year, Caesar was declared dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. On 15 March 1944 BC, the infamous Ides of March, Caesar was assassinated. As he entered the Senate chamber, he was surrounded by a group of conspirators and stabbed to death after a brief struggle. Mark Antony, who by this time was Caesar's closest ally, learned of the plot the night before but was delayed in responding. Upon hearing the commotion in the Senate chamber, Antony fled, fearing he would meet the same fate. After Caesar's death, Cleopatra remained in Rome for several weeks, hoping her son, Caesarion, would be named as Caesar's successor. However, she fled the city when it became clear that Caesar had named his 19-year-old great-nephew, Octavian, as his heir. This decision effectively excluded Cleopatra and her son from any claim to power, placing them in a precarious position. Cleopatra became a target of the new regime after Caesar's death. Octavian, Caesar's named heir, adopted the title Gaius Julius Caesar and is referred to by historians as Octavian during this period to distinguish him from his great-uncle. After returning to Egypt, Cleopatra acted decisively. A few months after her arrival, she orchestrated the poisoning of her husband and younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. While the exact motive remains unclear, it is likely that Ptolemy had begun questioning her authority. Following his death, Cleopatra elevated her young son, Caesarion, to the status of co-ruler, officially naming him Ptolemy XV. This move consolidated her power, eliminating any internal opposition within Egypt. However, with Caesar gone, Cleopatra faced a more significant challenge, navigating the volatile political landscape of Rome. The power vacuum left by Caesar's assassination in 1944 BC triggered a fierce struggle among his allies and enemies. His assassins, led by Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius, fled Rome and established control over territories stretching from Greece to Syria. In 42 BC, Octavian and Mark Antony led an army to Greece, where they defeated Brutus and Cassius in the decisive battles of Philippi. Following these victories, the Roman Republic's territories were divided among Caesar's leading supporters. Octavian assumed control of the western provinces, including Spain and Gaul. Antony governed the eastern territories, such as Greece, Anatolia, Syria, Palestine, and parts of North Africa. Marcus Lepidus, the third member of the Second Triumvirate, was granted authority over western North Africa around Carthage. This arrangement, known as the Second Triumvirate, was an uneasy alliance. Over the next decade, the three leaders vied for ultimate control of Rome. In 1941 BC, Mark Antony summoned Cleopatra to a meeting in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Recognizing the importance of winning Antony's favor, Cleopatra seized the opportunity to eliminate a lingering threat to her throne, her sister, Arsinoe IV. Arsinoe had rebelled against Cleopatra during the siege of Alexandria and had been living in exile at the Temple of Artemis near Ephesus in Greece. Using her charm and political acumen, Cleopatra convinced Antony to order Arsinoe's execution. Reports suggest that Arsinoe was dragged from the sanctuary and summarily killed. This incident exemplifies Cleopatra's cunning and ruthlessness. Nearly every decision she made was calculated to secure her position and safeguard her kingdom amidst the shifting tides of Roman politics. Cleopatra's actions during her lifetime can be seen as calculated moves to secure her rule in Egypt and ensure the survival of her dynasty through her children. A key question remains: did she genuinely care for Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, or did she view them purely as instruments to strengthen her power? Cleopatra skillfully secured her position as Queen of Egypt, first by aligning herself with Julius Caesar, using charm, manipulation, and political acumen to gain his support, and later by identifying Mark Antony, the most powerful man in the Eastern Roman Republic, as her next ally. Her alignment with Antony seems pragmatic. He controlled the Eastern Republic, making his support vital for Egypt's immediate survival. Moreover, Cleopatra and Antony had crossed paths years before, and Roman accounts suggest that Antony had been eager to start a relationship with her for some time. Cleopatra's alliance with Antony proved to be both a significant strategic move and, ultimately, her downfall. This raises the question: was entering into a relationship with Antony entirely her decision, or did circumstances force her hand? Initially, Antony seemed stronger than Octavian, and aligning with him may have appeared the safer choice. Regardless of her motivations, Cleopatra clearly gained advantages for herself and Egypt through her connection with Antony. Soon after their affair began, he transferred control of Cyprus and southern Anatolia to her, significantly expanding her territory. Their romantic relationship likely started around 41 BC, as Cleopatra invited Antony to visit Egypt later that year. Antony accepted, and during his stay, he and his commanders experienced the opulence and grandeur of the Ptolemaic court. In 1940 BC, Antony left Egypt to lead a military campaign in Syria against the Parthians. During his absence, Cleopatra gave birth to twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, the product of their union. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Antony's wife, Fulvia, was stirring up resistance to Octavian's growing power. Fulvia, alongside Antony's brother Lucius Antonius, led a revolt against Octavian. However, the uprising was crushed, and Fulvia died while traveling to join Antony in Greece. Following this, Antony and Octavian reached a treaty formalizing the division of their territories between East and West. To cement this uneasy peace, Antony married Octavian's sister, Octavia. The marriage produced two children, but Antony eventually rejected and divorced Octavia, choosing instead to deepen his alliance and relationship with Cleopatra. Cleopatra's relationship with Mark Antony continued to shape both their lives and the geopolitical landscape of the time. After the death of Cleopatra's rival, Octavia, Mark Antony's Roman wife, took on the role of guardian to Antony and Cleopatra's children. However, Antony and Cleopatra reunited in 1937 BC when Antony summoned her and their children to Antioch to assist in preparations for his campaign against Parthia. During this time, Antony further expanded Cleopatra's territories, granting her domains in modern-day Lebanon, parts of Palestine, areas in Arabia, Crete, and portions of Libya. These generous territorial gifts became a powerful propaganda tool for Octavian, who leveraged them to sway both senatorial and public opinion in Rome against Antony. In 1936 BC, Antony launched his ill-fated invasion of Parthia while Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, where she gave birth to their second son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. News of Antony's disastrous campaign soon reached Cleopatra, prompting her to travel to Antioch to support him. The couple then returned to Alexandria, where Antony met his newborn son for the first time. There, Antony began planning another military campaign, this time targeting Armenia, whose leaders had betrayed him during his earlier Parthian campaign. Around this time, Antony's wife Octavia arrived in Greece with 2,000 troops to aid him. Antony, however, ordered her to go no further east. Shortly thereafter, in 1932 BC, he divorced Octavia, a decision Octavian exploited to paint Antony as dishonorable and his sister as a wronged woman. Octavian's position in the Western Roman Republic was further solidified in 1935 BC when his forces defeated Sextus Pompey, the last major opponent of Caesar's heirs. Although Octavian had been aided by Marcus Lepidus, the third member of the Second Triumvirate, Lepidus attempted to assert control over Spain and Gaul after Sicily was captured. Octavian's forces defected from Lepidus, who was then stripped of his offices. Octavian subsequently took control of Lepidus's territories in North Africa, becoming the undisputed master of the Western Republic. Meanwhile, Antony, bolstered by reinforcements, marched into Armenia, captured its royal family, and returned to Alexandria, where he held a triumphal parade in the Roman style. During the celebrations, he presented the spoils of war to Cleopatra. This victory seemed to embolden both Antony and Cleopatra. Flush with confidence, they attempted to establish a dynastic empire, granting their children lands and titles. Cleopatra even declared her son Caesarion the legitimate heir of Julius Caesar, a move that made open conflict with Octavian inevitable. The growing tensions between Antony and Cleopatra on one side and Octavian on the other set the stage for a final confrontation, marking the beginning of the end for both Antony and Cleopatra. Cleopatra and Antony's growing defiance of Roman authority culminated in what became known as the Donations of Alexandria. In this act, Antony wrote to the Roman Senate seeking approval for his arrangements, which included granting lands to Cleopatra and their children. Octavian seized on this as propaganda, but it was largely suppressed by the Senate. Nevertheless, this latest display of Antony and Cleopatra's extravagance and their disregard for Roman power only brought the two sides closer to inevitable conflict. Tensions between the East and West continued to escalate, with both parties accusing each other of deceit and intrigue. Octavian claimed that Antony was under Cleopatra's spell and had married her while still married to his sister, Octavia, both accusations that, in a sense, were true. In response, Antony accused Octavian of unlawfully stripping Lepidus of his lands and office in North Africa. As the situation worsened, both sides began preparing for war. Between 32 and 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra mustered troops and ships in Greece, while Octavian gathered his forces and secured the Senate's backing. Antony was stripped of his consulship, and war was declared against Cleopatra, with the expectation that her lover, Antony, would fight alongside her. By late 32 BC, Antony had moved his fleet to Actium, a large inlet on the southwestern coast of Greece, which was guarded by the small town of Axos. Octavian's brilliant admiral, Marcus Agrippa, also harassed Antony's forces overland in Greece, trapping Antony and Cleopatra's fleet in the bay. Amidst these growing pressures, Cleopatra suggested to Antony that they break out and retreat to Egypt to regroup. He seems to have accepted her advice, and on 2 September 1931 BC, their fleet left the bay and engaged Octavian's forces. The battle raged all afternoon, with Antony initially holding the upper hand, as his larger ships, equipped with troops and ballistae, were formidable opponents, difficult for Octavian's smaller vessels to board. However, during the battle, Cleopatra's personal fleet, stationed at the rear, broke through the center and sailed directly out to sea. Seeing Cleopatra's retreat, Antony followed her, and as the rest of his fleet saw their commanders abandoning the battle, they quickly lost heart and surrendered to Octavian. The Battle of Actium essentially decided the war between Antony and Octavian, as well as the future of the Roman Republic. With Antony's defeat, Octavian became the supreme leader of Rome and eventually declared himself its first emperor, marking the transition from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. It is unclear whether Cleopatra lost her nerve during the battle, but the defeat sealed her fate, along with Antony's, and altered the course of European and world history forever. Cleopatra fled the battle, but it seems that an escape had been planned from the start. However, it is revealing that most of the fleet she left behind with Antony seemed unaware of the plan. This suggests that Cleopatra's retreat may have been known only to her and Mark Antony. Unfortunately, we will never know for certain. After returning to Egypt, Antony tried and failed to raise more troops against Octavian, who now seemed like an unstoppable force. It became clear to Antony that he had been defeated. He retreated into a life of seclusion, sinking into alcohol and lamenting his losses. In contrast, Cleopatra focused on ensuring the safety of her children and made plans to hide Caesarion. After failing to convince Octavian to allow her children to keep their lands if she abdicated the Egyptian throne, Cleopatra and her closest advisors took refuge in her pre-built tomb. She sent a message to Antony, falsely informing him that she had committed suicide. This news drove Antony into even greater despair, and he wounded himself with a dagger. Later, he was brought to Cleopatra's tomb, where, according to accounts, he died in her arms. Cleopatra then embalmed and buried her lover in the tomb with the permission of her Roman captors, who had now fully occupied Alexandria. Octavian, who had by this time arrived in Egypt, summoned Cleopatra to appear before him. Although clearly weakened, she did her best to maintain her dignity and composure. She expressed her desire not to be taken back to Rome to be paraded before its mob. Octavian assured her that she would not be killed but made no promises about taking her back to Rome. When the two parted ways, Cleopatra was informed that she and her children would indeed be taken to Rome. Facing the humiliation, Cleopatra decided to end her life. The popular legend states that she had a poisonous snake, an asp, brought to her to bite her. However, other accounts suggest that she took poison or injected toxic substance into her arm. Regardless of the method, the cause of death was poisoning. Outraged by her suicide, Octavian granted Cleopatra the final honor of being buried beside Mark Antony in their tomb. Despite excavations and searches in Alexandria, the location of the tomb and the final resting place of Antony and Cleopatra is still unknown. It is possible that the tomb is still out there, waiting to be discovered. After Cleopatra's death, her children were sent to Rome under the care of Octavian's sister, Octavia. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, was later assassinated by Octavian's orders in Egypt, further sealing the end of Cleopatra's dynasty. The end of the Ptolemaic dynasty marked the conclusion of everything Cleopatra had worked so hard to achieve, with her life ultimately ending in failure. In 27 BC, Octavian was proclaimed the first emperor of the Roman Empire and renamed Augustus, meaning revered. Over the course of his reign, he would prove to be one of Rome's most effective and capable emperors. Cleopatra is now regarded as one of the most famous women who has ever lived. Although many modern perceptions of her may be inaccurate, there is no doubt that she was an extraordinary woman who sought to take control of her life rather than submit to the decisions of her family. Through her love affairs with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, she seduced and enthralled two of the most powerful men in the world, nearly founding a new romantic Egyptian empire. Cleopatra was also incredibly intelligent, ruthless, and cunning, traits she needed to survive in the cutthroat political world of the 1st century BC. However, in the end, both she and her lover Mark Antony underestimated the ability and intelligence of Julius Caesar's great-nephew, Octavian. This, combined with their own mistakes and blunders, sealed their fate. Whatever your opinion of Cleopatra and the reasons behind her actions, one thing is certain. There are few people alive today, nearly 2000 years after her death, who do not know her name. In death, one could argue that she achieved what she had always wanted, lasting immortality. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and we count on your opinion in the comments.